play church and to be fake. You really want us to draw near to you. You want us to be right before you. And so, Father, we welcome your Spirit to come and do his work in our hearts and minds. Even before we open your word, prepare us to hear what you have for us. Pray that you would soften our hearts, make us teachable, help us to listen. Father, we pray this in your name, amen. Would you continue to worship with us through giving? Good morning, everybody. How's it going today? We made it just before the weather got real bad. So we'll see how bad it's going to be today. I got reports of really strong winds and man. Well, we're glad that you're here. I wonder if you have ever received a promise or an assurance from somebody, and in that moment, that promise brought you such great relief. It brought calm to your heart. Maybe you were worried about something or there was some anxiety, and a promise or an assurance just calms you. It could have been maybe in the middle of some financial challenges and someone said to you, let me help you with this. And so there was financial relief. It could be maybe there was a heavy season where you were burdened and somebody said, I'm going to bear this burden with you. I'm going to walk with you in this. Maybe you've been stuck in a situation where you just didn't even know what to do or how to think about something, and somebody said, I want to take care of this for you. Don't you worry about this. I got it. And because of their experience or their knowledge or their wisdom, they brought you great comfort in dealing with a situation that you didn't know how to. I remember a time in our life where Brandy was quite sick. We were living in North Carolina, and she was having all kinds of tests. And I remember she had to go in for a bone marrow biopsy. And one of the things I wasn't thinking about is that all this stuff can cost you something. You know, it's not for free. And so one day I remember going out to the mailbox and seeing a medical bill, and I opened it up, and it was $9,859. And I thought, this is a problem. I was in seminary at the time. Brandy was working full-time and was functioning as the breadwinner for our family. And needless to say, we could not afford an almost $10,000 medical bill. And so I went to class that night, and I was talking to my fellow students, and my professor said, would you guys pray about this? I don't know what we're going to do. We can't afford this at all. And so the next day, I called the billing company to see, well, maybe we could get put on payments or something. Maybe there's some way we can get this squared away. And the lady on the phone said, we've got this. It's been taken care of. I said, well, what do you mean it's been taken care of? She said, it was just that bill went out to you a little bit too early. And we have a fund that takes care of things for folks that are in need, and you don't need to worry about it. Your bill's been taken care of. The relief that I felt in those moments, it was almost overwhelming. I remember going and telling Brandy, it's done, it's taken care of. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to pay this. And I couldn't even really explain why. It just was done. The lady on the phone said, and that was the last that we heard of it. And it was tough to express how those simple words on the phone, that promise, that assurance that this bill was taken care of, made us feel. The level of relief that pulsed through me. And often, the level of relief that we feel at a promise or an assurance that things are taken care of reveals the importance of that need in our life, that there be an answer there, doesn't it? So last week we talked about becoming people, becoming the family that God calls us to be by way of where we place our friendship or what is influencing us. This week, James is going to unpack how that happens, and he's going to offer us some promises. He's going to offer us some assurances, some things that he's going to take care of that help us not only think off into eternity about the fact that God's got it taken care of, but these promises are going to help us right now in our church family. I want to unpack those with you today. If you've got a Bible, we're in James 4, 7 through 10. It'll be up on the screen. I'll read it for us too. James writes, "Be subject therefore to God, and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Purify your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and be sad and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. Be humbled before the Lord, and he will exalt you." Wow, if we're hearing those, maybe it doesn't sound so encouraging. It sounds like there's a lot of negative stuff in those verses. And I don't know really how that helps me be a better member of the family of Jesus Christ. Well, let's take a closer look. Here James extends, I don't know if you caught them in these verses, he extends 3 promises from God that are results of our behavior. And what we want to understand this morning is God's promises reveal and meet our deepest needs. His promises reveal and meet our deepest needs. But there's a caveat in there. These promises each include a command. And so if we're not willing to do the things that result in these promises, we'll be missing out on God's best for us, not just as individuals, but as a family, all of us together. And in this passage, James hits us with a long list of commands. If you're into grammar, they're second person plural. That means they're y'all commands. So as we look at this passage, it's important to remember that each command that he gives, it's not just for you or just for me, it's in us. Like we all have to obey these commands together. In fact, we can't obey these commands outside of community. And so we need to be doing that. First is this, friends. It's the promise of freedom. If you're following along in your notes, the promise of freedom. Look at verse 7. "Be subject, therefore," he says, "to God and resist the devil, and he will flee from you." And as we said, each promise has a command on the front end of it. Here, we're required first to submit and then to resist in order to experience freedom, James says. You were wired to enjoy a relationship with God. That's how he made you. You were also made to be free from sin and our enemy. We know that that changed pretty early on in humanity, but originally it was not so. But last week we saw a challenge to that. We might have a friendship problem, an influence problem, which ultimately is a submission problem. And if we've made friends with the world and we're submitting to the world and we're being influenced by the world, we are not going to experience the freedom that James is talking about here. We're going to experience instead, and what James means when he says to submit or to be subject, it's a passive kind of command, meaning that we are to allow ourselves to be made subject to something or someone else. We allow ourselves to be put under. It means to cause to be in a submissive relationship, to be a subordinate. That's real popular in our culture nowadays, isn't it? Our culture says these kind of people are weak. They're soft. They're compliant. And those are negative characteristics. But it is not so in the kingdom of God. In the kingdom, we're to willingly place ourselves under another. We are to entrust ourselves to God, to Jesus take the wheel kind of a thing. We put him in control. We put ourselves underneath his authority, and we trust him. In doing so, we are a subject of God's when we allow ourselves to be subject to him. And a king has subjects. And what James is saying is, subject yourself to God and be a subject of his. Paul called himself a slave and a servant, and that's what we are to do too. Only then can we abide by the second command that comes before the promise, which is to resist. Resist means what we might expect. It's to be into opposition to something. It's to set yourself against something. It's to oppose it, to push back. It means to take up a position of resistance. in opposition to someone or something. With the result now, the promise that our enemy will flee. And flee means to seek safety in flight. Right? In other words, the safest thing for us as followers of Jesus Christ is to be an unsafe place for our enemy. You ever think about yourself as that? Being an unsafe place for your enemy to reside? That's a wild thought, isn't it? What's interesting to note, too, that the ability to resist follows our willingness to place ourselves under God. Notice the order. This is the only way that we can resist, is to first be subject to God, to follow Him. Then we have what we need to resist our enemy, and then the promise is that He will flee. Last week, James pointed out the dangers of friendship with our enemy, the world and the culture. And if we are not first friends of God, relating rightly to Him, there is no way we will offer resistance to the enemy. The truth is, we've probably already befriended him. There's a therefore in this verse, and the therefore ties us to the previous section we talked about last week, in that the only submission to God, only in submission to God and resistance to our enemy, is it possible to live as we should in the community of faith that is in the church of Jesus Christ. And there's something else at play here too, perhaps something deeper. God wired us with the need for purpose. This goes all the way back to the garden, where Adam lived out his purpose and working in the garden and worshiping God. It was here then, too, that purpose was distorted when he chose to resist God and submit to the devil. You see, he flipped it, and that was the problem. He did the exact opposite of what James is calling us to do here, which is to submit to God and resist the devil. In these moments of the fall, they no longer submitted to God. They submitted to the enemy, and they resisted God and His command. And so James lays out for us, in a manner of speaking, the way back to wholeness with God, upward wholeness, and to reverse the curse, and to rediscover purpose by doing the opposite of Adam, and submitting to God and resisting the devil. And when this happens, I grow reacquainted with my purpose as an image bearer of God, as a subject in the kingdom of God. And I am most who I should be, and most able to do what I should do, when it is the one who created me who's in control. And I have submitted myself to His control and His direction. Well, this hints at the first great commandment, doesn't it? Submitting all to God, loving Him with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and putting all that I am underneath Him, and giving it to Him, trusting that He will do what is best. And friends, the promise of freedom can only be realized in an understanding of God's purpose for me. And if we do not submit ourselves to God, if we do not put ourselves under Him, not only will we never resist our enemy, not only will he not flee, we will not discover what God made us to do and who we are to be in Him. So there's a lot at stake here. You see, it's the submission to God and the absence of the enemy's influence that allows us then to experience number 2, which is the promise of fellowship. The promise of fellowship. It's the second thing. In verses 8 and 9, James continues, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Purify your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and be sad and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy into gloom." Here, the promise appears straightforward, almost simple, right? I draw near to God. He responds to me by drawing near to me. Boom, it's done. Well, draw near means to move close to somebody, as you might expect. It's to come near. And it's used of both humans with another human and humans with God. And what we're talking about is not just a proximity thing. We're talking about alignment with God, where we agree with God. Note that there's participation that happens here. And there are no percentages, all right? So God's not talking 50-50. So God, okay, I'm going to give you 50%. And God says, great, I'll pick up the other slack in that, give you another 50%, and we're off to the races, and we're together, we're united. Friends, what this requires of us is everything. Drawing near to God is 100% of who we are. Go back to that first great commandment, heart, soul, mind, and strength, 100%. Everything you got, we're giving it to God, everything that we're called to do. And then in return, He does everything. He does 100% of the things that only God can do in our life. So we give ourselves to Him, and He gives Himself to us. And so we say, well, it's a promise. What assurance do I have that if I give everything to God, He's going to give everything of Himself to me and draw near to me? Friends, He already has. We didn't beat Him to it. He already sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for us and was resurrected, ascended to heaven. He intercedes on our behalf. Friends, He's already demonstrated that He's going to give everything. And so we're not leading God in this. We're responding to Him. And this command to draw near is hard, but it's not. He's asking us to draw near to the one who's done everything, to draw near to us. But He promises that if we will do that, that He will continue to draw near and that we will experience His presence. But still, maybe this throws us for a loop, because you might say, well, I know how to draw near physically and even emotionally to another person. I can give somebody a hug. I can sit next to them. I can have a great conversation with a brother or sister, and our hearts can be knit when we talk about things that are near and dear to us, and maybe we grow in our relationship and in friendship. But we're both humans. How does one draw near to God? And how is it that God draws near to us? In other words, how is it that we are really to experience this divine community with God? May I suggest that James offers us a path to it in this verse. James continues in the following verses with a series of kind of curious commands. He says, purify your hands, sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and be sad and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. Well, that sounds like a great road to get to God, doesn't it? And folks are saying, I don't know that sounds good. I don't want to volunteer for that. I think life's hard enough as it is. I don't really want to engage in this kind of behavior. It sounds heavy and sad. Well, let's unpack this together and see how it may not be as bad as you think. Purify, he tells us to purify twice. And purify means to make something clean. It spoke to taking steps to make oneself ceremonially clean, like in the Old Testament. There were prescriptions for that, and thus making you able to participate in the worship and right relationship with Yahweh God. And so it kind of envisions that process. Here, though, it speaks to moral cleansing, to putting off sin, like Paul might have said, and it opens the door to right relationship and fellowship with Christ to two groups, to sinners and the double-minded. The sinners are to cleanse their hands, which applies to our actions, right? What we're doing. Jesus spoke of hands as the instruments which carried out sin and which must be dealt with. And guys, we talked about this recently in men's Bible study in Matthew 5:30. Jesus says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. The point being, guys, if it's this thing right here that causes you to sin, that's causing distance between you and God, that threatens your eternity, it's better that you do away with that thing one way or another. This is serious. Don't let one part of your body, one member of your body, keep you from doing what's right. And James comes in and he says, look, sinners, you got to purify those hands. You've been doing things that you shouldn't. You need to deal with your sin and deal with it decisively. That's a step to drawing near to God. You've got to deal with your sin. James adds another group. We've got the sinners, hands of everybody that's a sinner in the room. Now we've got the double-minded, right? The double-minded have a problem with their hearts. It says they need to cleanse those hearts, which applies to our thought life, our will. That's what the heart was. It wasn't just a seat of emotions. It was how I make my decisions. It's a core part of me, how I think. In fact, the double-minded is a theme in James, starting all the way back in chapter 1. He warns, if you're asking for wisdom, as you should, but you doubt, you're a double-minded person, and you're tossed by the waves like in a storm, and that person should not expect to receive anything from God. And so, here the double-minded person shows up again. He says, hey, if you're double-minded, let's deal with that heart of yours. Let's cleanse it. Let's trust God. And so we're going to have a really hard time drawing near to God if we are sinful and we are engaging in habitual sin, enjoying sin. It's going to be hard to draw near to God if our thought life and our emotions are out of control and we're doubting Him and we can't trust Him. That's going to be a major hindrance to drawing near to Him. But James isn't done with us yet. He says, lament. That's to experience distress. It's to be miserable. He says to be sad too. And this is to experience sadness as a result of a condition or a circumstance that causes us to grieve and causes us to mourn. He says that's where you should be. He says weep too. Well, what's he talking about? Well, friends, I think it's a response to the grief of brokenness that we experience when we realize we are out of alignment with God. And he's saying, agree with me about your thought life and your behavior. Let that grieve you. And taken together, these three words paint the picture of profound sadness at one's condition. So friends, we can't be perpetually sinning. We can't be perpetually living in doubt that God won't do what He said He would do and be double-minded because He's making promises, and if we're not going to believe those promises, we're in trouble. And then we too need to agree with Him about our condition, and our condition needs to cause us to grieve and to mourn and to be sad because we've not been walking with Him. But James still isn't done. He takes it even further to tell us what this looks like in our lives. And he says, your laughter should be turned to mourning, and your joy should be turned to gloom. And this command to be turned refers to a change in our state, with the emphasis upon the difference in the resulting state. So what that means is we're not focusing on happy here. We're focusing on turning from the happy and what the opposite of happy is, and what the opposite of joy is. Now we have to be clear about what James is talking about. He's not just asking us to be bummed out and depressed. He's not asking us to go to a bad place. There's a precedent for what he writes. And we find it in Ecclesiastes. I've often preached this at funerals. In Ecclesiastes 7:2-4, Solomon wrote, "It's better to go into the house of mourning than to go into the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." And so in keeping with Solomon's wisdom, the levity of laughter is to be replaced with the misery of mourning. The jubilance of joy is to be replaced with the gravity of gloom. How could that be? How could that be a place where God would want us to go, a place that He would want us to consider and to think about? Friends, in the context of this verse, Solomon is saying you need to pay attention to what is most important. You need to pay attention to what is eternal. And it's crazy how a funeral can do that to us. When we're considering the life of somebody who's passed, we think about what people say about them. We think about their eulogy, what mattered in the end. And often it causes us sitting out there in the church or in the funeral home to take stock of our own lives and what's going to matter. We think about our own eulogy. We think about what our friends and family members might stand up and say about us. And Solomon says, this is a good place to be. Don't be in a hurry to get out of there because you're thinking about things that are really important. You're thinking about your legacy and that which is eternal. And so returning to our relationship with God, with these commands in mind that James has given us, how is this promise of fellowship that he lays out here anything we would want part of if it's so heavy? Brothers and sisters, fellowship with God follows upon his economy or the economy of the kingdom. And that looks much different than our world's priorities. In the kingdom of God, life is found through death. Gladness found through sorrow, and the first shall be last. It's a very different way of looking at life. And James beckons us beyond the shallow, fleeting fellowship of this world, beyond its friendship, to locate our hope in the eternal, on the other side of death, on the other side of grief. And he's saying, friends, this time is but a breath. So if you mourn now, if you grieve now, it's not for long and it's not forever. And it may be a good thing for you to consider that now so that you locate your hope not here, but in eternity. And so this is a person here that finds the fullness of divine fellowship, having released their grip on the world, having shaken loose those things that captivate and distract us here, and focused on God, who grieve their condition, who consider that their condition right now is keeping them from relationship with God and from those things that are eternally important. And this is what fellowship, this is what community with God requires from us. This is what it means to be subject to Him and to be a subject of Him. So we say that the promise of fellowship can only be found in true community with God. And community with God is wonderful. It's fulfilling. It's encouraging. But we don't get there if we don't rightfully understand the problems with our own life and with our world. So sometimes some grieving needs to take place and sadness. Well, James is going to close on a higher note, thankfully. It's not going to leave us down there. Third thing is the promise of furtherance, the promise of exaltation and of lifting. Take a look at verse 10. Be humbled before the Lord, and He will exalt you. And so James is continuing with this revolutionary and counterintuitive nature of the kingdom of God and how God intends that we interact with it through a command and again a promise. And this verse reaches back to verse 6, which we talked about last week, where James says He gives more grace. Therefore it says God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. To allow ourselves to be humbled is to be caused to be at a lower point, to be put down. Here it means to cause to become humble in our attitude or in our estimation of ourselves. And James commands this with regard to our proximity to God. It's in our relationship to Him. He says, before the Lord. Before is like being face to face with somebody. It's like being in front of them. And so James is saying, allow yourself to be humbled before God, in the presence of God. So it's not just speaking of the quality of being humbled, but it's of the quantity too. Be really humble. How arrogant can I be when I'm face to face with God? Hopefully not very arrogant. It's not going to go well for me. And God says, be humbled to my face. This is great because he's talking about us drawing near. We draw near to him. He draws near to us. And it's so important and it's so appropriate that our humility would come face to face with God in his presence. In other words, James is saying, allow yourselves to be humbled in the presence of the very one who is humble, who allowed himself to be humbled on the cross, and to whom all humility is due. That's the one. That's our God. The one in whose presence we are to be humbled. And our previous point leads us here to this place of humility. You see, when we're willing to mourn and turn from our previous state, our humility opens us to the experience of the goodness of God, of all that he's planned for us. If I'm arrogant and I refuse to grieve my condition, I close myself off from all the good that God has for me because I think that my plans are way better. And my plans are way better because it doesn't include grief, and that does not sound too fun. But if I'm willing to grieve my condition, if I'm willing to be humbled before God and be subject to him, I'm in a great place to hear from him. I'm in a great place to experience what he has for me, to experience, and we are not going to be sold short. Well, it's the lowering of humility that is a prerequisite to the lifting of exaltation, James says. This word he uses, exalt, means to lift up. But in particular here, it's to cause an enhancement in one's honor or their fame or their position or their power or their fortune. It's not just a participation trophy. It's an actual lifting of your state. Some of us might use the word blessing to describe this. And exaltation here is not in contradiction to the humility that we express before God, because we're not doing it ourselves. We're not pushing it ourselves. We're not being fake humble. It comes, that is, our exaltation comes in a state of humility that is bestowed by God. And this is also a passive command, meaning allowing yourself to be made humble before God. God's not saying, hey, come before me and make yourself humble, make yourself bow down. He's saying, no, come to me with what you got and let me do the work in you. Let me do the work of humbling you so that I can do the work of lifting you. Church, I believe that we are wired to desire exaltation, to be significant, to act significantly. Otherwise, James' words wouldn't matter to us. We wouldn't care. And God's promise wouldn't carry meaning to us. And there's a reason, though, that humility is a precondition for the exaltation that comes from God. This is because our exaltation is to glorify him, not just us. May I suggest that our exaltation is for the purpose of serving? It is to have influence, to contribute beyond ourselves. It is to be and to do something that transcends our own lives. It's to have a hand in something eternal. So, wanting to be exalted isn't in and of itself a bad thing, but it goes back to our heart. If I wish to exalt myself, I've got a problem. If I humble myself or allow myself to be humbled before God so that he might exalt me, that's where it's at. You see, being exalted by God is always God's intent, because it's in that way that we engage significantly in his plan for humanity, in the furtherance of his kingdom. But we've got to pursue it in his prescribed way. And he says this is in humility. Trusting that if I allow myself to be lowered, it is he that will lift me up. And there was a problem a long time ago with this, all the way back in Genesis. With a woman and Adam, you know the story, but in verse 3:6 of Genesis we read, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And so in the beginning, friends, there was a humility provision. It was for the man and the woman to place themselves under God, to work the garden, to worship God, to be fruitful and to multiply, to allow Him to direct into what was good and right, to obey. But it was countered by a humility violation. And we see here that when she saw, she thought it was good, and she saw that it was desirous to make one wise. And what the enemy was doing is he was twisting God's intention, purpose, and significance. And it was about what they saw, they wanted. And it was no longer about what God saw. And the problem is that when we, like Adam and the woman, say we're going to exalt ourselves our way, we're going to go our own way, we run into trouble. Because the principle has always been not to lift oneself, not to do what is right in one's own eyes, but to lower ourselves and to trust our God and our King who would raise us in His time, in His way. Solomon talked about this too. He's kind of a wise guy. He said in Proverbs 25, 6 and 7, "Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great. For it's better to be told, 'Come up here,' than to be put lower in the presence of a noble." Solomon's saying, look, if you go around showing off, thinking you're so great, and somebody puts you in your place, it's humiliating. But if you humbly sit back and allow somebody to call you up and to exalt you, it's glorifying. It's exalting. Peter also grabbed onto this concept in 1 Peter 5, 6. He says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you." Friends, if I raise myself, if I exalt myself, it is worthless. If God raises me and exalts me, it's priceless. So the promise of furtherance can only be found in the significance that God provides. Friends, if I try to make much of myself, if I pursue my own glory, my own influence, I will be humbled before God. I will be humiliated before God. But if I allow God to do the work of humbling me, He will exalt me in His time. And it will be right. Well, I'm going to invite our worship team to come on up as we close. Friends, it all comes down to finding community with God by humbly trusting that He will provide everything that we need. And I think sometimes that scares us. We think about all the different things that we need, and we sometimes wrestle with God's timing. We sometimes wrestle with God's provision. And when He doesn't respond in the way we want Him to and in the time we want Him to, we kind of get in there and we start demanding things and going our own way. But in these verses, James is saying, trust God. Obey God and trust that His promises will come in the way and when He wants them to. It's in this way that God's promises reveal and meet our deepest needs. So some questions this morning as we close. Friends, are you experiencing freedom? Are you experiencing freedom in your life? What I mean is, are we experiencing freedom in living God's purposes for us? Are we experiencing a love of God that's based in obedience with heart, soul, mind, and strength, giving our all to Him? Or are we experiencing the shackles of doing things our own way? Are we experiencing the shackles of sin? Friends, are we experiencing the fellowship that God intends with Him by living in a vital, abiding community with Him, in His presence and with one another, which is a byproduct of living in right relationship with God. Is that real? Maybe some of the ways we realize we've got a problem here is we're not connecting with people. We don't have good relationships with people. If that's the case, I would advise you to look back to your relationship with God. Because if we're not loving God the way that we should, we are not going to be able to love one another the way that we should. So it's a question to evaluate and think about. How about this? Am I experiencing furthering, exaltation, blessing? Maybe many of us would say, actually, I don't feel like I'm experiencing that in my life. Maybe we put it another way. Are you, through humility, experiencing His lifting? Are you experiencing the ability to be part of His plan here on earth as He directs you? Are you too busy lifting yourself up to be lifted by God? And friends, I would encourage you, and there's a great book I would recommend to any of you by Andrew Murray. It's called Humility. It's a great book to read. It's been working me over the last year or so. Are you allowing yourself to be humbled by God? I'm not talking about beating yourself up. I'm talking about getting in the presence of God and saying, God, I want to be shown your power and your glory so that I might know where I stand with regard to you. So that I might think rightly about you and think rightly about myself. So that in due time, you can exalt me and you can bless me and you can show me what you want me to do, the ways in which you want me to contribute to your kingdom through eternal behavior. Well, friends, if we're doing these things, we will not miss out on a relationship with God. We will not miss out on the relationship that He has for us with one another. Well, it's a great Sunday to be celebrating communion with you. This was a great discussion to lead into communion. So I'm going to invite our men to come forward and prepare to serve you. And we think about communion is a remembrance of a new covenant that God made with us through His Son, Jesus Christ. And it is Jesus that made possible this relationship with God and this relationship with one another. Without Jesus, we wouldn't be here. And so as we think about that fact, it's super appropriate for us to take of this communion meal together as a remembrance of what He's done for us. And so we're going to invite you to come up and take a portion. We'd like you to hold on to that portion. We'll all partake together at the end. But in these moments, in these quiet moments, would we consider our relationship to God and our relationship to Jesus Christ and being humble before Him? Would you come on up?